Hi, everybody. It's David Leis here, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier Live on February 19, 2026, the year of our Lord. And I am delighted to see everyone join us here for the program. We have a action-packed day in front of us here on the program. We've got a very dynamic panel as we talk about the media, its importance, and what better people to talk to than leaders in that industry. And they are important to our society, and they have a difficult job. And so, of course, here on Leaders in the Frontier, we look at it from a public policy point of view. We know that the media is essential to our society. So we want to look at this issue with clear eyes, especially today when we need information, truthful information more than ever. So we appreciate our audience greatly, and we're looking forward to everybody coming on here. And hello, everybody. Alberta here. Hello from Calgary. We've got people from all across the country. And hello from Mississauga. From coast to coast to coast, we all come in. And we get a lot of comments. And so I'd like to share some of those with you today. We're so appreciative. Finally, a video that is telling the truth, and that is from Othmar Brunner. Thank you. And we have Leaders on the Frontier channel has a very easy, balanced approach for complex conversation, breaking down the issues and speaking about them concisely without diminishing the importance. I enjoy this style of program. Thank you. And that's from Rutkin. And we also have thank you for the very informative discussion and explanation of some extremely important topics that impact all Canadians. And that is from Bob Caddy. Thank you. I just came across your podcast today. Well done. I'll be listening very frequently now. And that is from Dave Gravel. Thank you, Dave. And we have a lot of news happening in this country. And I'll come back to the topic of the media in this country and our panel in a moment. But I just wanted to, as usual, highlight some news headlines. If you haven't noticed them, there's an awful lot going on in our country. And I think a number of these pertain to our topic about the media, one of which is a recent ruling about the travel ban. You may recall during COVID-19 that we were forbidden from traveling unless you got the vaccine. And they were extraordinary infringements on Canadians' rights. And it was justified in the name of public safety, says the Supreme Court of Canada. And that was a decision, a 5-4 decision, and that was upheld. And that was regarding a case from Newfoundland. And so that's a fascinating decision. We've also got some interesting appointments happening at the federal level to head up the Carney government's negotiations coming up with the Canada-US-Mexico trade agreement. And this is from the Honorable Janice Charest. And she's well known in certain circles. She's a top advisor, civil servant. And of course, you may recall her role in certainly using the Emergency Measures Act, which was utilized during the COVID lockdowns. And that was just recently ruled as unlawful. I also want to turn to the news of another MP leaving the Conservative fold to move towards the Conservative government. This MP is from Edmonton, and of course, there he is shaking hands with the Prime Minister. What do you think about that? He ran, obviously, under the Conservative banner, and MPs have that prerogative, but he made the decision to choose another pathway. There's a number of them that have switched parties, and they're known to us. Now, it's interesting. There's a situation now where I believe the government is 3 members short of a majority. And so that includes Chrystia Freeland's riding as she went on to pastures with Ukraine, with the Zelensky government as a special advisor. And of course, we have another MP, Bill Blair. I believe he went to the UK High Commission, as I recall. And then thirdly, we have the Supreme Court weighing in, calling for a new by-election in Quebec. So this is quite interesting times here when it comes to whether the government will have a majority in the House of Commons. We also have some other interesting things in the news here related to what is it here? The whole question of priorities. When it comes to the federal government, I thought I'd share this poll with you that relates to top 3 priorities for the federal government right now. The top one is the rising cost of living. And I believe this is from the Abacus poll that I cited here. The economy at 40%, Donald Trump and his administration at 39%, housing affordability and accessibility at 33%, healthcare 33%, and immigration at 24%, and then getting into a whole host of other issues. What are your top priorities as we look at the issues that face us? And in other news, I wanted to also highlight the Green Transition Report related to net zero. This is a very interesting group out of Copenhagen, certainly one of the colleagues that we often cite. His name is Bjorn Longberg, and he cites the green transition cost at some $16 trillion over the last several years from 2004 to 25. This is an astounding sum, but it was a well-done report, and I would certainly bring it to your attention. I also wanted to highlight a fascinating statement that came out from a Kamloops First Nation that related to the whole notion, and this is reported in Blacklock's Reporter, that after 5 years and millions of dollars in federal funding, this First Nation in Kamloops explained this week that there's a new set of spiritual protocols, and missing records is why they haven't dug up any of the 215 alleged children's graves they announced in 2021. I believe one of the protocols is that there be a unanimous decision or agreement by all First Nations from children that attended the school in Kamloops, the residential school, and that there be a consensus among those parties that there should be excavations. So under that protocol, we may never know what really happened in terms of the claim regarding mass graves. So go figure. In the meantime, I also want to highlight an interesting story that is happening out of BC. On Tuesday, there was a budget tabled there with tax increases and a number of job cuts, but record high deficits of some $13 billion projected for next year. And so stay tuned on that file. And also in Winnipeg, an interesting issue that came up in terms of the city's proposed bylaw to ban protesters. And I have this clip I wanted to share with you.
We have a situation where our charter rights are under attack in the language that has been proposed. It is not careful. And anybody who's telling you that it has been carefully tailored or that it is only doing a specific job isn't telling the truth about what's in the bylaw. And it's important that Winnipeggers know that and that we resist this kind of effort to constrain our charter rights.
The proposed bylaw would have created 100-meter buffer zones that would ban protests around schools, hospitals, community centers, and places of worship. First-time offenders would be subject to a fine of $500 and can escalate to $5,000 for repeat offenders. Councillor Duncan addressed the outrage.
We have several factors of this bill that potentially need to be revisited. As we heard from several groups today, too broad, okay? That's a great point that the community is making here. My bad for not doing the extensive community consultation that is needed in this case, but I'm still supportive of safe spaces within the city of Winnipeg.
Over 100 delegations came out and opposed the bylaw during Tuesday's city council meeting.
I wanted to speak as somebody who's attended hundreds of protests and who often is there with a safety mindset. One of the things that they say this bylaw would have improved was safety, and I wanted to speak to the fact that actually when community builds safety together, it's always safer for the people and even people who are against us.
Winnipeg is a city of passionate, concerned people who will gather and demand justice. I think so many of the protections that workers enjoy today, the history of Manitoba is one of resistance.
The bylaw has been shelved as the city waits for Bill C9 to come forward.
So there you go. What do you think of that proposed bylaw? In other news, I want to highlight that inflation is cooling a little bit. The general rate is at about 2.3%. So that may give the central bank a little bit of room to lower rates. But in the meantime, food inflation is around 5%, 4.8% to be precise. And finally, expenses for the public service are still on the rise as we identify at the federal government that costs continue to increase at almost 5% in terms of civil service costs, despite different cuts that are happening. All right, so we have an incredible topic to dive in today with a dynamic panel to boot, and I want to talk about the media today. We know that in a free and democratic society, a media is more important than ever. It's the so-called fourth estate in free and democratic societies, namely the executive is the first, followed by the legislature, and then the judiciary. And then the fourth one is, of course, the media. We know information is important. So with me here today to talk about the media is Derek Fildebrandt. He's the publisher of the Western Standard, an all-around great guy, dynamic fellow. You may come across him many times. Welcome, Derek.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And I have Jasmin Laine, who is a well-known podcaster. She is from the media, and she was a former morning radio host. And you may have taken in one of her programs. A warm welcome to you, Jasmin.
Thank you very much.
And last but not least is my friend, Gene Valaitis. And Gene is a dynamic host of 6:10 a.m. based in Niagara. And I have the pleasure of joining him every week. And so a warm welcome to you, Gene.
David, thank you. I'm really excited to be here today. It's going to be fun. Here we go.
It's going to be fun. So right off the bat, I want to dive into the most important question. That is, what's happening with the Olympics, Gene? You are watching that closely. What's going to happen this afternoon as we speak? There's a very important game going on right now.
What's happening at the... Oh, yeah, we're heading into the third period of women's hockey. Canada leading Team USA 1-0 heading into the third period. Oh, my goodness. I can't wait.
So fingers crossed. And hopefully by the end of the program, we will know the results. And Madam Producer, maybe we can even announce them. Who knows? So as we dive into this topic, I want to start off with a really basic question. Why is the media so important in a free and democratic society? And I want to turn to you, Derek, and ask you that question and make our rounds. What do you say, Derek?
Well, I don't want to get professorial on it, but the answer to that question changes almost daily because defining what is media changes daily. I mean, traditionally, the way you say I grew up with the media is you've got a few big, and then you got some local outlets that are kind of broadly considered the media, and they're kind of the intermediary between the public and the state, the public and police, business, major institutions, things that are of public importance. So they're supposed to be good faith actors theoretically. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. They're supposed to try to be neutral and just keep people informed about what's happening. But what we define as the media has changed radically. I know, the Western Standard is a member of several press galleries of different legislatures across Canada. And, we conduct ourselves pretty, I wear a suit to work, but we conduct ourselves pretty professionally. And so even though a lot of the legacy media don't like us, we're recognizably media, but others, they might be, it's a less traditional look. You've got, Jasmin here's a podcaster. I'd say that's just kind of the modern equivalent of the talk radio show host. It's just a modern version of it. But the barrier to entry to become media is now so low. It's damn near free. So Jasmin, I can see, has got a microphone. She looks like she's just in a nice room in her house. She's got so really her costs are a microphone and a camera. It used to be you had to build a multi-million-dollar radio station, have transmitters, you had to have a license from the CRTC. For me, it used to be you had to have printing presses, you had to have distribution, you had to have all of this stuff. When I started the Standard, I started it with like a couple $100. We're much, much larger today, but the barrier to entry was low. Because we could, back then, Facebook, wasn't required by the government to ban the distribution of news to the public. So I had free paper boys delivering my product out. That's no longer there. So because the barrier to entry economically is now so low, anyone can come in and be the media. And so that's radically changed the role of it, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse.
Okay, so the media has changed remarkably. What are your comments, Jasmin?
I would definitely agree. I think there's a lot of traditional aspects to it, depending on where it is that you're getting your information from. But I mean, ultimately, the goal of the media is truly just to inform people. It's not to really pick sides or anything like that. Obviously, that dynamic has changed a lot in the last couple of decades. But I would argue that perhaps what we see a lot more nowadays is because there's a subset of people who feel as though their concerns, their voice, the things that matter to them are not being heard, or perhaps the focal point isn't quite what is necessary for progress for our nation at times, that then they may rely on other people who are speaking to them, right? And so I would say that, yes, it certainly has changed. I think there's been a huge surge in citizen-led journalism, which once upon a time was not vilified that much. There's been a lot of wonderful things that have been covered by citizens just taking a stand on their own and trying to get to the bottom of things. It has absolutely changed. Yes, indeed. I completely agree with that. But I wouldn't say that it's for the worse at all. I'm a really big believer of whether you disagree or agree, the more information, the more voices you have, the better, especially in a world like today where, with technology advancements, it's quite simple to figure out whether or not somebody is saying something that's right or wrong, so long as you have the desire to discern that information and look into it on your own.
Okay, so we've got a lot of choices in the media landscape. It's very dynamic. What's your comment, Gene?
When I was growing up, the media was the truth. I remember as a little kid, my parents would read the Globe and Mail in the morning, and that was the paper of record. And at 11 o'clock at night, it was the National on the CBC. And that was the newscast of record. There is no more media record. The agenda has been set, and the agenda has been hidden very, very well by the mainstream media. So it's all about an agenda now. And what's driving the agenda is money. And it all started with Google. Google changed everything. And to stay afloat, you had to do certain things to make money. And if you didn't do that, you went under. So you were saying the media is in crisis. It's been in crisis for years now. And the key culprit to blame in all of this is the CRTC.
The CRTC. What is the CRTC, Gene, to ask a dumb question?
The Canadian Radio and Television Commission, which regulates the broadcast airwaves in Canada.
And how did they get this whole domino effect going in terms of a change?
Well, let's say the CRTC wasn't a government regulator. Let's say it was a let's say it was a publicly funded company and it was traded on the stock market. If you take a look at the results of what the CRTC has done in Canada over the last 25 years, it has put hundreds of broadcasters out of work. It's had people and big companies give their licenses back. It has given licenses because of formats they think people like, but nobody would listen to. So broadcasters have been fired because of the CRTC. They've made terrible decisions. It's a perpetual make work program. And we don't need the CRTC anymore. It is completely irrelevant. The CRTC in the year 2026 is a horse-drawn milk carriage in a digital age, making a make-work project for themselves. Like I said, if it was a publicly traded company, the shareholders would have revolted years ago. They decided on dual ownership years ago, and it collided with Google coming in and killing advertising. But they keep acting like everything is okay, and it's not. And we need fewer regulations in Canada. Broadcasters can take care of the broadcasting industry. Civil servants can't. The civil service has exploded by 80% in the last 10 years. Now, are we being served better by 80% in the last 10 years? I don't think so. You can't get hold of a human at the CRA. You know, that's 80% growth. You can't get a hold of anybody. The CRTC decisions are killing broadcasters. So so are they doing a good job? No, they're not. It's time to change.
Time to change, and that's from the great Gene Valaitis here. So I want to turn to Derek and Jasmin. So are you with Gene's description that the CRTC needs to be basically gotten rid of? I don't know how you described it, Gene, some kind of milk cart or something like that we need
No, I said, you know, the CRTC is the equivalent of a horse-drawn carriage delivering milk door to door. We don't live in that age. We live in a digital age. They're not there yet.
What do you say, Derek?
Yeah. Look, I think I agree with practically everything he said, and it should be done away with, or more or less gutted down to its bones to leave its bare what it should be its bare regulatory function in place, or outright killed. But it has been destructive I think on the broadcast media side of things, but the CRTC has very little to do with newspapers, magazines, that kind of thing. So I don't think we can blame the CRTC for that. I think it's been very destructive for the private sector broadcasters. What it does is it keeps in place the existing broadcasters at the expense of new entries. The CRTC was the decisive factor ensuring that when Sun News Network was making a run at being a major competitor for a cable news channel, it was the CRTC that more or less said they're not going to be allowed to compete on equal ground. So the CRTC is very much a villain in this story. I don't think they're the main villain, though, when it comes to, say, newspaper. And they're trying to affect podcasters and whatnot. So they're a bad guy here. But I think a lot of it is just market forces. A lot of the collapse in the media is not just in Canada. It's been right around the world. And it began really with the internet. And there's no putting that toothpaste back in the tube. And the failure of the media to adapt to this new technology that changed everything. It used to be that, you put out some content, it can be broadly based. And if you wanted advertising, there was not a lot of places to advertise. So the media had a natural quasi-monopoly. The beginning of the end was like Craigslist, because that killed the classifieds. Classifieds died, and that was the big source of money for tons for newspapers. And then it went on and on and on. And the fact is that Facebook and Google provide a better advertising product for the most part than media can ever hope to provide. And the media did not adapt to the changing industry. It just kind of doubled down or did some gimmicky stuff that didn't work. And then you had in Canada, we did the worst of all things, is the federal government came in and said, oh, well, you haven't adapted to the new online media, so we're just going to subsidize you. We're just going to give a bunch of cash, and we're just going to draw out this low and slow, painful death. And it was, as Milton Friedman said, there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. The media bailout was supposed to be temporary. All of us knew that was not going to be the case unless there was a change in government that was willing to kill it. And it is now a permanent program. In the last election, the Conservatives gave up their opposition to it because they were hoping, I think, to buy some favorable media coverage. Spoiler, they didn't get that out of changing their policies. So now you have every political party represented in Parliament is in support of the federal media bailout program. So that's just a permanent thing there. It's not going away. It's not just there to help them over the hump. But what we've done is we've baked in the incumbent actors and made it more difficult for new players to enter. You can still enter it as maybe an individual podcaster, an individual Substacker, that kind of thing. But if you wanted to start a new media company, like I did the Standard 6 years ago, that's extremely difficult unless you got some investors with deep pockets. So we've just done the worst thing, which is to bake in the incumbent players, stop innovation, stop the insurgent players from coming in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Derek. So we need to keep innovating, and we all agree the CRTC is problematic in terms of its regulatory role, but also the media needs to continue to adapt. And so what's your comment, Jasmin?
There are certainly some aspects of the CRTC for regulatory purposes, especially when it comes to logistics, regional, radio waves, which telecommunications is operating where and where their towers are and things like that, that the CRTC oversees as well, that are fair enough, because obviously you're going to need somebody that has some sort of a jurisdiction or a map of where everything else is. So there are aspects to the CRTC that aren't absolutely terrible, but I would certainly agree with the notion that it has become overbearing in many ways. Obviously, I would argue some digital, but largely, radio, news stations, things like that are heavily impacted, as well as streaming services. And I would say, it's been very interesting to kind of see the CRTC as this, for lack of better words, this shadowy figure in the background. That part of the big reason why I believe there are so many Canadian companies that are in media that have a really difficult time surviving or competing and really getting ahead and adapting, which I agree is completely necessary, is that the CRTC, due to government legislation, is able to impose these quotas on Canadian content. And so for a radio station, let's say, well, Justin Bieber isn't Canadian content. Drake only has like 60% or something of his albums are considered Canadian content. But it's this mandate that you have to have a certain percentage of Canadian content. That hurts radio stations who are trying to be competitive with Spotify and playing the best music. That hurts even, big networks like the CBC or Global with some of their other independent programming outside of the news, because they have to include a certain capacity of Canadian content. And in some cases, it's quite high. I recall back in my former career, before I went independent, there were many stations across the country whose Canadian content quotas were anywhere from 35 to 45% of their programming. And when you don't have a competitive media landscape and you don't have the ability for, Canadian filmmakers, Canadian talent, all these people that we have seen typically don't stay in Canada for very long. There's lots of data to suggest that, if somebody scores a really big show in the US, they're going to leave and go to the US and, and be there. So we don't have the competitive environment at all in Canada, really, to not only produce top talent, but to also keep it. And then you're also forcing people to abide by this. It has to be Canadian, so I think that it can be quite harmful. I would also argue as well that the CRTC themselves have been involved in, I'm going to use this word and I don't mean it to be as intense as it is, but have been involved in certain aspects of lobbying, I guess, like unofficially, but, encouraging for there to perhaps be some more tools in place, some more things more control in their hands, so that they're able to receive more funding from the government, able to have a little bit more control in things. It just recently, actually, in a committee hearing, there was a discussion around how the CRTC technically does under Bill C-11, if I'm not mistaken, as well as Bill C-18. They do have a lot of control when it comes to algorithms in Canada, what appears on the search results in Google. And, we can blame the CRTC all we want for that. And I think fair enough. However, it's bigger than just the CRTC. It really does come down to other federal legislation that overall is very much hurting the industry of media. And they'll always say that, well, it's gonna protect Canadian journalism, it's protecting Canadian jobs. But you can take a look at all of those big companies and their annual reports, and most of them are laying people off left, right, and center. If you listen to radio in most cities right now, the host that's talking like they live there actually lives in Vancouver or Toronto.
Or the United States.
Yes, that as well. So the industry is shrinking. It's getting smaller because it's not able to compete due to the legislative boundaries that the government has put on it in order to protect our identity.
And the other thing, because of the CRTC and the decisions that it has made, and like I said, if it was a publicly traded company, the shareholders would have revolted. It took a great industry and, in essence, took it away from broadcasters, and now accountants run broadcasting companies. So the accountants go, well, show A, we're paying that guy too much money. Let's get rid of him. We'll save a lot of money. And they bring in somebody with no experience or a minimal amount of experience. The ratings go down, and the accountants go, what happened? We're not bringing in the same amount of revenue. Well, if you don't even know how to walk into a studio and press the red button and get on the air, and you're sitting there with an abacus at your desk, that's not how you run a broadcasting company. And that's Canadian broadcasting right now.
All right. Well, so this is a pretty difficult, challenging environment. We've got challenges from technology. The internet changed everything. We've got basically the economic model is very challenged. We've got the regulator messing around, the CRTC. We've got a lot of changes that make me concerned, because last time I checked, in a free and democratic society, people need information. It's almost like the paradox of our society. We've got gobs of information, but how do we figure out what is actually going to be truthful, or let alone helpful information, so that voters, people can go about their lives and know what's up or down in this society? Where do you get your information? I'm curious, Gene.
Well, like many people, what I do is I have become my own newspaper editor. So I go from internet site to internet site to internet site. And every morning I put my imaginary newspaper together and I try to trust what I see. What bothers me about the general public that doesn't have a background in broadcasting is what they perceive to be the truth. So let's take a look at Matt Genereux, who crossed the floor in Edmonton the other day. So Rosemary Barton is on the CBC yesterday, and she's giving her comment on why Matt Genereux crossed the floor. And she said, well, it's probably because people in Alberta are warming up to the idea of our new prime minister. And she said, and that people in his riding in Edmonton are also warming up to that idea. Well, somebody at the CBC forgot to turn her microphone off. And this occurred yesterday. So they went to another report, and what did you hear in the background? I'm just making all this up. I'm just making all this up from the federal broadcaster. You know what that is?
I totally missed this story. Obviously, my eyes are in the books here. But you're saying there was a mic moment where somebody was listening in and she was joking about this.
I believe the quote from her was she laughed very hard at something and then said, well, it's all made up anyways. And so I suppose in their defense, if there were to be added context, maybe she would say that it was in response to something totally irrelevant that a producer said to her. But yeah, it's
no, it's fake news. And, if you watch, Power and Politics in the afternoon, David Cochrane is carrying the water of the Liberal Party. And, this is a federal broadcaster. All of us in this call and everybody is listening, we fund the CBC. It cannot take sides, but it clearly has taken sides. And when a member of parliament crosses the floor and you speculate on Albertans are warming up to the prime minister, and then you laugh about it and say, we're just all making this stuff up. Well, yeah, they're making stuff up. Don't make up stuff with my tax dollars, please.
Right on. So I do want to play an interesting clip here, and we've all heard about this by a minister of the Crown, no less, Mark Miller, in front of a committee talking about, I believe, legitimate media. Madam Producer, I think we have this clip ready to go.
An age that we're all living through of intense disinformation. There is less social cohesion as falsities are propagated through media sources, both legitimate and illegitimate, integral to a healthy democracy. Indeed, the fourth pillar of our democracy is a healthy media ecosystem that exercises rightly its freedom of expression. Again, integral to that is a state-financed public media that is the CBC or Radio-Canada, not state-controlled. Indeed, the CBC's mandate is one that is ferociously independent, and we should all defend that, whether they're saying good or bad things about us. So when there is a lack of support for a public broadcaster, I think that contributes to the spread of disinformation, and social cohesion is therefore affected. It's not about any sort of command and control of the media system that you may see in other countries.
So I'm trying to understand the minister's remarks here, and I have looked at the transcript, and I'm scratching my head saying, for the sake of social cohesion, we need to be supportive of a state broadcaster, namely the CBC. Is that your take on it, that the CBC is integral to social cohesion in this country, Jasmin?
No, not at all. I think to play devil's advocate, I think what Mark Miller was trying to express is that traditionally media outlets, when he says social cohesion, there's a lot of speculation on what that could mean. However, again, just to play devil's advocate, I think what he's referring to is the fact that, the CBC is absolutely the truest of true news. It is unbiased, and it's a way to make sure that all Canadians we're all united in one big community with the right information. Social cohesion. It's the thing that helps you bring you peace, when you need to know what's going on. The CBC is there to do it. Fair enough, if that were true. That is certainly not the current perception of the CBC, even amongst viewers, in the slightest. And so it's really bizarre to say that. Additionally, in what world does a taxpayer-funded outlet that is frequently insulting people who didn't vote for the Liberals, dehumanizing them, belittling them, in what world is a taxpayer-funded outlet the tool for social cohesion, and what gives them the power to be the end-all, see-all, or end-all, be-all superior body when it comes to media? And even just to point that out, the CBC does have a corrections page for the corrections that need to be made when they don't do them on air, and that page gets updated every day. And there have been dozens of very, very important stories of world events, things in the community, things happening provincially as well as federally. And the updates that they have in there that they don't even mention on the show is just shocking. Like, where they've gotten some really serious details wrong. The hosts themselves have overspoke dozens of times. And I think, I can't recall which segment that is, but it's Rosemary Barton's panel that she does. And there's 3 guests with her usually. I just can't recall what the name of it is right now, but it's Rosemary Barton, who I would argue is outward facing, at least definitely a Liberal voter. And then the other 3 panelists are all on the same team as well. So you just have this group of people where they're supposed to be giving a diverse discussion, but all 3 of the other panelists have previously been Liberal strategists, former party members to some capacity, former staffers, things like that. So that right then and there kind of breaks open that narrative wide open. And just as a final point, it is just beyond me to listen to a minister speak so much about misinformation, disinformation. What's the implication there? That anything other than the CBC is not trustworthy. When you say things like that, it has an effect. Your words really do matter. And I'm pretty tired of that implication being made, that you have to trust the CBC, even though they've gotten plenty of things wrong. They've been late to plenty of stories, as you would expect from any business, right? And just to insinuate that there's all this disinformation and misinformation, I'll be quite frank, I grew up in the era of technology and being on the internet. It's pretty rare that I come across stories that are getting mass virality online that are just nothing but fake news. It's actually quite rare that happens. And so I would really love for him to perhaps give us a definition, some examples. What exactly is this misinformation and disinformation that you are referring to? I would love to know.
I find it interesting, the correction page. It's really the "we got caught" page. Now, yeah. David, I lived in Hong Kong and I worked there, and I lived and I worked in Dubai. I heard a lot about social cohesion. It's called censorship. And in Dubai, I would go and I would try to pick up a Canadian newspaper, and the screen, I would be censored. In Hong Kong, I would try to read articles in different newspapers, and I would be censored. Same thing in Thailand. Social cohesion is just another word salad for the government is going to take care of you, but the government doesn't know how to take care of me. And I don't want the government taking care of me. It's why we need less government, fewer regulations, and let industry take care of itself.
Would you agree with that analysis, Derek?
Yeah, but I'm going to give you guys a sidewinder. I agree with Mark Miller. I just think it's dangerous. Mark Miller, and I don't mean to offend. I'm kind of old now too, but I don't mean to offend older viewers or the older people older than me on the show here. But he is pining for the good old day, kind of boomer era, where you had a Walter Cronkite that was everybody, the left, the right. He was trusted, rightly or wrongly, to be the fair voice of sober news and analysis. When he says something, you didn't think there was an agenda behind it, and everyone trusted it. You know, as you were saying earlier, you know, you would, you know, you came home after supper, you watched these shared national experiences, and he wants that, because that social cohesion is also another way of saying control, a docile citizenry. If social cohesion means we have shared values and we have a high trust society, you know, my kid can leave their bike on the front lawn and trust that it's not to be stolen. That is the kind of social cohesion I can get behind. The kind of social cohesion he is talking about, though, is the government, the state, the powers that be say something and the people believe it. That's no longer the case because we have a fragmented media. The downside to that is, yeah, we don't all agree on a shared set of facts. The upside is that when the establishment are pushing facts that are just not true, that there are other voices that can contradict it. And that makes a significantly more divided society. Well, we need a significantly more divided society because we've been peddled a bunch of propaganda BS. During COVID, you had all of the legacy media saying safe, effective, blah, 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 blah. And any even very reasonable skepticism about, say, transmission, you know, like I'm generally pretty pro-vaccine, but we would have a reasonable skepticism that didn't go down conspiracy rabbit holes. Although my apologies to all the conspiracy theorists out there. You've been proven right on all. You're batting pretty good right now, so I got to apologize. But you know, you now have voices in the media that don't agree, that don't follow the narrative. We would not have the Epstein files today if it wasn't for independent and alternative media. Yep. This is because there's podcasters who went out there and spent years diving deep into this stuff, exposing things, building a critical mass of people from small numbers, and built up. And now it's in the mainstream. Behind me, I got the BBC on. The first royal since the 15th century has just been arrested over this stuff. That wouldn't have happened if we had social cohesion. So he likes the idea. He's pining for a day that's never gonna come back, where we all sat down after supper and we watched the National together. In the morning, yeah, we read the Globe and Mail over our coffee. Those days are not coming back. That's because you have independent media. And independent media, I still use the term, but I try not to use the term mainstream media, because I don't think there is a mainstream media anymore. I still use it as a pejorative term because we kind of know what we mean when we say that. But in many ways, we're the mainstream now. Like in Alberta, I'm going to toot my own horn slightly. We beat the Calgary Herald virtually every month on readership. You know, we're beating the so-called mainstream media. So, like, in some sense, we're the mainstream now. And so the powers that be, Canada, the United States, Germany, UK, everywhere, they're bemoaning this because they can't control the narrative. And the same goes for the center right. You know, like, again, kind of coming back to Epstein. The center-right media in America, say Fox News, they bought all the stuff around on Epstein. You had Trump saying there's nothing here, and that was establishment media. It took the independent actors who are less reliant on the business interests of the powers that be, that are less afraid of the social sanctioning that comes with saying something that is perhaps unpopular and outside of the Overton window, that's able to move things. And so this is a major problem facing liberal, social democratic regimes across the West, where they can't control the narrative anymore. And in places like Germany, they're literally raiding magazines, like Compact Magazine. They're literally going in with police and guns to try and shut these things down.
Well, I think you make great points that we need a dynamic media ecosystem, but not in the way that Mark Miller's describing it, for kind of a unified control of the narrative, so to speak. And so I'm really heartened by this conversation. And obviously that's why I invited the three of you on this panel, because I know that you are critical thinkers and you have lots to offer. So I just encourage everyone in our audience to look at the Western Standard, what Jasmin Laine offers on her program, and Gene Valaitis. So I look at this issue now and I ask you the question, when did the media start going sideways? Or was it always biased in some measure? We just didn't have perspective on it. Is there an easy answer to that?
I would argue, former Prime Minister Diefenbaker had a lot of issues with the CBC. He called them out directly as early as 1957. So perhaps that's a timeline you can look into, especially when it came to politicians, when they started becoming a little bit more leaning in one way. But I'm of the belief that there was a certain shift that absolutely started to happen, very recognizable in the 90s approximately. And then it wasn't so bad for a little while. But I would say that, and this is just my opinion here, that when Justin Trudeau was running against Prime Minister Harper and he had given the first promise of more funding, there was a really dramatic shift that we still feel today, and it's been over 10 years. Additionally, when Mark Carney was running against Pierre Poilievre, same thing. He had promised more money. That was a part of his election ploy. I personally think that is just a massive conflict of interest. I'm opposed to that at every stop. I don't think it's ethical to be reporting on an election when your business would gain so significantly, with the result being one way or the other. That is just my opinion there. But I would say for sure, the 2010s was really stark in how media coverage was changing, and it was certainly impacting public perception, public opinion. It was really impacting things in a way that I think a lot of people didn't realize even what it was doing to them and their views and what they thought of what mattered to them either. And I'm really hopeful that we're coming out of that. I think there's a lot more people slowly but surely who are waking up to the fact that the media, exactly as previously stated, has an agenda. It absolutely has an agenda, and the media has a bias, and that's okay. It's actually completely fine to have a bias. We're human beings, and you're bound to have a bias on just about any story once you know it deeply enough, or if it personally affects you. I suppose the difference between perhaps somebody like myself and somebody like the CBC is that at the very least, I tell you my bias up front, and you can then filter and discern everything that I say through that lens, rather than pretending as though I don't have a bias. This is the full truth. This is social cohesion. And then telling you something where every word that I say is showing you my bias. I just refuse to admit what it is.
Okay. Now, Jasmin, would you describe what you do as, would you say it's current affairs, political commentary? How do you describe your work?
I would just say political commentary in general, but I cover predominantly Canadian news. And then, if there's things that are relevant in the US or the UK, I'll sprinkle those in as well.
Mm-hmm. And Gene, your comment is, how do we get at media bias here? Is that even possible?
Well, of course, there's going to be a media bias. I say follow the money. Google changed everything. Changed advertising and broadcasting, it changed advertising and print. And when your business is suddenly going down the drain, you don't want it to go out of business. You want to get out of the quicksand. So a lot of people compromised themselves and they started doing things that they would not normally do had they had a lot of cash coming in. And that led to the media bailout. I mean, so here is the federal government funding all these companies who are writing about them. So do you think there wasn't a couple of reporters who said, maybe I won't add that paragraph at the end because the federal government is paying 1/3 of my salary? Follow the money. It's all about the money. It always has been, always will be. There are those who stick to their guns and they report the goods. But there are a lot of people who just want to keep their job. In terms of my show, right now, I'm sadly a political orphan. I voted Liberal for years, but I didn't leave the Liberal Party. It left me. And I just wasn't really too sure about the Conservative Party in the last election. So on my program, I have voices from the left to the right and in between. And right now, I'm searching for somebody who has really good ideas, who is really going to represent Canadians and is going to take on things like an April 1st pay raise and say, no, Canadians are struggling. Let's get all the parties together, pass a quick bill that says we're not going to take that pay raise. Look at the poor MP, the drywaller, who said, I'm not going to take my $8,800 pay raise. And he was dressed down by the Conservative whip in caucus last Wednesday and heckled to the point where he left. That was a pivotal point for the Conservative Party, where they could have said, yeah, he's right. Let's stand up for working Canadians. But no, we want a pay raise.
Well said, Gene, and it's an honor to be part of your program every week. I'm looking at it through the lens of public policy. What actually, from a principle point of view, serves Canadians? And this is not about party affiliation. This is about getting back to the basics of what will serve Canadians. So, Derek, can you tell us more about the Western Standard and how you view your role then within the media landscape?
I'm always happy to humble brag, but I can do that. But I want to take kind of your previous question about is the media more biased now, and I maybe I'll address that as a way of getting into the Standard. I don't think there ever was a golden age. I think there was a perceived golden age. We always tend to romanticize the past on virtually anything,
yes.
And in many ways the past was better on some things. I think there's a perceived golden age of Walter Cronkite, because we assumed there was no bias at that time. I think with hindsight, we could see a lot of bias. We could see a lot of opinion that came through. I think there was just a better, first of all, there was less mediums, as I said. If there was 3 channels, they had to try to appeal to everyone, roughly everyone at least, to have maximum market share, maximum readers, maximum viewers, sell more advertising. Now that you have more choice, the media are narrowcasting more. And it'd be one thing if that was, private ones, the Calgary Herald, the Toronto Star, CTV, but even the CBC, which is supposed to serve all Canadians, narrowcast to their audience because these broad catch-alls that are supposed to go to everyone don't work anymore. And, Jasmin was right that government involvement in the direct funding of media was a seminal moment, but I don't think it started there. That's when the government got directly involved in the print media business. But to your point earlier, Gene, on the CRTC, the government has been directly involved in the newsrooms on the broadcast side since the CRTC and the CBC was established after the First World War. So that has been there for a very long time, and it's been very evident. It's now just creeped into the rest of the media. What we do at the Standard is we've got 3 departments. We've got operations, which is just kind of back end stuff, all the boring stuff no one sees. We've got a news department and we've got an opinion department, and those are separate departments. The news is just to do straight news, and I actually have to scold our reporters more often for writing something that I actually agree with, but is not maybe using neutral language. Our opinion side is just straight opinion, and it ranges from like center right to harder right, and that's the way it's going to be. Every once in a while, we'll have we actually have a columnist we call Token Lefty. I like to hate read it. It's kind of rage baiting our people, I have to admit. But for the most part, with a few exceptions, it ranges from kind of like a mushy conservative to a much more rigorous right nationalist. And but our news side just tries to give straight news. What we do though is we try not to just cover the same stories in the same way as everybody else. Like we have a different style guide. Most people use the Canadian Press CP style guide. We call ours CP plus. We use that as a baseline, but then we change things. For example, like just in the language, like you're supposed to capitalize B for black people, but you're not supposed to capitalize W for white people. Well, I'm an equal opportunity racist, so we don't capitalize anyone. No one gets capitalized in my books at the Western Standard. So so some of it's just kind of stylistic, some of it's language. So like let's take for example Tumbler Ridge, the tragedy in BC just last week. Word came out. I just left the office. We started getting the first word of what happened, and it says a woman in a dress. I thought, well, that's a bit odd because statistically, women do not do mass shootings. It's just not it's not statistically, it's extraordinarily small. So I said, well, that's very curious to me.
Mhm.
And then we see the RCMP report a gun person. That's not a real word. If you put it into your Microsoft Word, you're going to get a red squiggly line under it because it's not a real word. They made up the word for this instance. And so we instantly knew, okay, I think we know where this story is going to go. And so we got someone on the ground, human source journalism. We had people on the ground in Tumbler Ridge. I actually happen to know someone there. I had reporters driving through the night to get there. We confirmed the identity of the shooter, that this was a biological male identifying as a female. We identified this person nearly 24 hours before the RCMP released what it was. And all of the media were reporting this was a man. And then once it was clear they knew it was not a man, they all defaulted to this new made-up term, gun person. And the propaganda was so in your face that, like, you know, during COVID, the propaganda from establishments and during COVID, it was subtle, and you know, they turned up the heat at different points. They didn't start at maximum heat; they turned it up. Tumbler Ridge, they started at 10. They started at maximum heat right away, and it was so in your face and unsubtle that I'm pretty cynical about people kind of going along with just what they're told, but I have a feeling that everybody could really see this, and it just further denigrated trust in our establishment, legacy, mainstream media. And so, you know, so this is kind of the way we try to approach a story is, if everybody else is already going to cover this story, and we're not going to add any value that, say, the Globe and Mail, Canadian Press, CBC is not going to add, we don't really spend a lot of time on it because we're not adding any extra value. There's no value added to our readers, or even just as a business. We're not adding anything new. So we don't spend a ton of time with it. So we try to find an aspect of a story that we expect to be, or that we know to be, underserved. And in this case, it was the RCMP, parroted by the media, lying to the public, including in the emergency message that went out to people in Tumbler Ridge that there's an active shooter. They intentionally and knowingly misdescribed the shooter. They said there's a woman in a dress. If I'm looking for a woman in a dress, that's different than what was actually happening. So they potentially put people's lives at risk by trying to be politically correct and sensitive to a psychopathic mass murderer. So again, so this is how we try to address things on the news side. It's going to be fair. We're going to try to make it as objective as we can, but it's always going to be factual. But we're going to try to approach it to cover aspects and angles of a story that we think are not being done justice by the legacy players. And that's how we've been able to really carve out a spot for ourselves in the media landscape by doing traditional journalism. In many ways, we're kind of an old style media here. You know, we got a newsroom on the other side of this wall. It's one of the only newsrooms left in Canada, print style newsrooms. We're kind of old school journalists in many ways here, but we've carved out a spot for ourselves by doing old classic style journalism, in the style you used to see at the Sun papers before they were bought out by Post Media, and just focusing it where we think Canadians are being underserved.
Okay, so Derek, you just overviewed, I think, a very powerful example, a case study, if you will, on the need for good journalism, for critical thinking, for investigative, really digging for the facts and getting at the information to serve our audience and our society. So I'm wondering, in this case, Gene and Jasmin, is that an example, perhaps, Tumbler Ridge, where the media is its own worst enemy, that if we're not getting at the facts, the information, we kind of denigrate the trust in the media, and it's complex. Any comment on that?
You know who was lost in this whole thing because of the RCMP and because of our national broadcaster? The victims. The victims were lost in this.
That's what I was going to say.
And when you say to anybody, you know what, I heard people coming up with their own pronouns for the shooter, and I can't say them on this broadcast because they're obscene. Can you name one victim? No, because we didn't take care of the victims. They were victimized, and the victims and their families were victimized again because they were the central part of the story, not because of a nutcase with a gun.
Well said, Jasmin.
I'd add on that as well. I think, if that crucial error, and it is an error, very correctly stated there, that it is to have an emergency alert that isn't accurate is dumbfounding. To have articles coming out about the first female shooter in Canadian history is dumbfounding. And that's not to take away from what anybody, like, I don't personally care what makes you feel more comfortable when it comes to your gender identity. Like, how you identify your gender is irrelevant to me. I'll do my best to be kind and respect you as a human being and as, you know, my fellow brother or sister on earth. But it was pretty unreal to see the way in which within 7 hours, CTV News in particular had, and I think this was actually initially published by the Canadian Press and it was reshared by several outlets, but they had an article saying how mass shootings have helped the government change gun policy laws. If you start an article, I'm stealing this from Brian Lilly, a columnist from the Toronto Sun, but you know, if you start an article with mass shootings have helped, you're on the wrong path. Additionally, the amount of attention about the gender identity of this assailant is sick. It makes me feel sick to my stomach. The fact that within hours, we didn't even have publishings of the children who were taken from us. We didn't even have their names published yet. The RCMP hadn't even released that, and already every news outlet in Canada was posting about, oh, well, you know, we fear a backlash towards the trans community. Well, trans violence and this, and it's just like, stop. This isn't about you right now. This is crazy. People are grieving. We are mourning for these families, for those children, for those precious little angels. This is not about you right now. And to me, the audacity that the media had any inclination to make the focal point of the story while we're awaiting more details from police or from families of, you know, surviving family members of the victims. It was so sick. It was so sick. And notice how quickly they did that too. And why is that? Is that because it's something that they really care about? Is that because they were too worried about the backlash from activists who tend to get a lot of leeway in terms of what the narratives are in this country, as well as many Western nations? Is it because I can't rationalize that, actually. I really can't. Why on earth would that be the focal point? Not those children. Most of them were born in the 2010s. Are you kidding me? That's such
a sad story, and I applaud your comments. I think it gets me to, frankly, another challenge I think that's facing the media, whether we like it or not, and that has to do with, frankly, we've got a different definition of facts in our society. And I know we're getting towards the end of our conversation. This is a very complex conversation, but we know that facts matter. But I just don't want this to be lost, is that if we look carefully at what's emerging out of many universities, is the whole notion that, well, your gender is what you declare it to be. And this is a reflection of a certain way of thinking, a worldview, that your facts are really driven by your own perception. And so this is where I think there's a confusion that if you believe that, well, many journalists come out of journalism schools, how much is that a factor in drinking in that kind of ideology that there is no truth, that your truth is basically what you declare it to be? And I referenced earlier in the news the whole issue and claims of mass graves. I mean, this is really difficult things, but in an age where you would just simply say, well, if you assert a truth, then we should be able to, as per the scientific method, being able to examine it and find out what the bottom line is here. It seems like some of us in our society aren't on the same page when it comes to that. Is that part of what's going on here, Derek?
Yeah, just this morning, I've actually been interviewing a few people today, and I had one of the people I interviewed. I won't disclose who this person was, but it was a young person, had just come out of a journalism-related program, and towards the end, I wanted to prepare them for the kind of newsroom we got back here. I said it's not quite the set of Mad Men, but you got to be prepared for a more offensive atmosphere than you probably grew up with at your post-secondary education institution. And I said, for example, one reason you got an interview, so your resume did not have your pronouns on it. If you had pronouns, my staff all know when screening resumes before they hit my desk, every resume with a pronoun goes straight in the figurative shredder. We don't print it off. It just gets deleted. It doesn't even get looked at. I don't care if you got a PhD and you got a Pulitzer Prize. You're just not getting in our doors for an interview. And this was shocking to this person. Coming out now from a post-secondary educational institution. In many cases, I don't want to bash everyone who goes through journalism school. I've actually had some great hires that come through J school, but many of the best don't, because I'm looking for traits more than training. I'm looking for people who have a nose for news, people who can figure out where is there a story. They could just see things and figure out where's there a story to get. We should pull this string a bit more. That's what I look for when I hire journalists, more than formal training and a good resume. I mean, those things count for something. I don't discount them the way I would pronouns, but it's hard for someone to come through a post-secondary institution. Like when I went to university, it was terrible even then. It's even worse now. The good news is those who make it through a post-secondary education and haven't bought the propaganda, they're more hardcore than you can imagine, because they've been forged in flame and heat. It's a tough place. So a few people come out of these places and they're already battle hardened and ready to take on the world. So I'm not entirely pessimistic that everyone coming out is as intentionally programmed as an automaton as they're supposed to be. Some people make it through and they're all the tougher for it.
Well, fascinating comment about university programs in journalism and the need to hire people with, what is it called again? Critical thinking skills, for sure. So as we wrap things up, I wanted to ask each of you a final question. What is your advice to citizens as they look at the media landscape? What should they do? How do you get your information that can serve the truth and be able to know what the heck is going on in our free and democratic society? Who wants to go first?
Well, I guess that means me. I would say first and foremost, it's very, very important for you in any situation, truly, to develop the skills to recognize the signs. And what I mean when I say that is, recognize the patterns of certain things. If there is a psychological operation going on, if every single media outlet has the exact same opinion about something, if every single time they're always missing certain nuances, look for the nuance. If you see a headline that makes you feel something, remember that the news is not supposed to tell you what to feel. It's supposed to tell you what's happening. So keep little details like that in mind and read history. There are a lot of recurring patterns here that are not new. They are very far from new. They have been used in generations, across generations. So read history and pick those details out. I think it's also really important for maybe this one is a little odd, but for people who have young children, especially, raise your kids to have a lot of natural curiosity. Curiosity is a brilliant tool when you know how to utilize that correctly, and the things that you'll be able to spot that others will not, just because you have fully formed this curious section of your brain where you want to know, you're curious. I think that has so much value. It's unbelievable to me. And then also, again, thanks to bills like C11 and C18, I would highly recommend, if you want some information about news stories, to go past the third or fourth page of Google. That's usually where you'll start seeing a few other suppliers of news, a few other places where you can actually get some details that may not all be published from the same writer that's just being reshared across various platforms. And I think ultimately, though, truly, if you find yourself like reading something or hearing about something and you're not getting, there's always another side to things, right? And so if you feel as though something has been covered and it might make you angry, but you didn't get the other perspective, the person, who perhaps they're discussing, and that person and how they're talking about them is making you feel angry. Well, what did that person have to say? And why didn't they want you to know about it? So I know people have busy lives and it's chaotic and it's stressful, but it is our moral obligation to do everything that we can to participate in this democracy and to be wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove. And to do that, you need to be willing to take the time to learn and to educate yourself and to just think and be curious.
I like your advice, Jasmin. Great tips. Thank you. Gene?
Well, you know, for years and years, dating back in history, people thought the earth was flat. One day somebody said, yes, unfortunately, but one day somebody said, is it really? So my only advice is, in print media and in the broadcast media, always ask the question, is what you're telling me the truth? And you know what? I don't want to discount the fact that we have some great print journalists. We have some great broadcast journalists. But always ask the question, is it true?
I love that question, Gene. Thank you. And Derek, final comment?
I'm a bit more pessimistic. I think we're all screwed. Assume everyone is lying. In fact, assume like I'm lying. Assume everyone here is lying. And here's the scariest part of all. Sometimes we don't know when we're not telling the truth. On many things, I, honest to God, thought I was telling the truth. And then I figure out I've been propagandized. And because I've been propagandized, I pass that on to my newsroom and we are perpetuating it. That's what's really scared me. Like, I already apologized to the conspiracy theorists, except for the flat earthers. You're still not that great, guys. But everyone besides the flat earthers, the Epstein files have, like, I can't stop going through this stuff. But I kind of want to take the blue pill again at this point. It showed how deep the rot goes, and that sometimes we're being played and we don't know it. I consider myself a relatively worldly, sometimes cynical and discerning person who's very skeptical. And they've gotten me on a bunch of things. And as a result, I've done a disservice to our readers, our viewers, our listeners, by passing on, psyops, propaganda, whatever you, to them. The news is a lot more fake than we think. And even the independent outlets, we're getting it wrong a lot of the time because we don't know that we've been played. Everything's fake right now. And the problem is you're going to go crazy. You're going to go completely crazy trying to figure out what's fake. Like some AI videos, I'm pretty good at spotting it, but it's getting really quickly better.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes it gets you. And the trick to making a fake AI video look real is to make it look low quality, like it's a doorbell camera video or something. The same thing in news. And if trying to discern, is this story from the CBC or the Globe or the Western Standard, is it intentionally leaving something out? Yeah, it probably is, but you're going to go crazy because we have so much time in the day, and eventually you're going to have no hair left to pull out. So I have no good answers except to just despair at how fake everything is.
All right. Well, there you have it from Derek Fildebrandt, publisher with the Western Standard, Jasmin Laine, podcaster, and of course, Gene Valaitis. I have so much appreciated our conversation. This has been dynamite. So thank you for joining us as we've talked about the importance of the media and, dare I say, the importance of critical thinking skills. And what the heck is this? 2-1, the U.S. wins the gold in overtime.
Oh.
Well, and maybe that's the point, is we all got to be humble when we look at this information. I think in many ways that was Derek's point, is that our attitude of humbleness matters. I still recall, and I recommend this book to you from many years ago. It was a book called Propaganda by Jacques Ellul, who said the people that are most vulnerable to propaganda are ones who believe they know it and are educated. So go figure, as we look at the importance of truth in our society and healthy debate and discussion as we look at creating a better Canada. So thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, David.
And thank you to our audience for joining us to this terrific discussion. I hope you found it helpful to you as you go about your life. And I hope to see you next week on Thursday for our next live and discussion on Leaders on the Frontier.
Here at Frontier, we don't receive any government funding. We are nonpartisan and we work for you. Find out more and support this important work by visiting fcpp.org today.